On a peaceful winter afternoon, I was enjoying a game of chess with my son Eric. The warm light from the fireplace gently illuminated our living room, filled with antique furniture. With a composure unusual for a 15-year-old, Eric was carefully considering his next move. "Mom, I'm just 3 moves away from checkmate." Smiling at his words, I found myself reminiscing about my days at Stanford University. That day when Robert, known as a genius in the computer science department, suddenly proposed to me after I had graduated top of my class in business. My father, an executive at a major investment bank, blessed my decision to become a full-time housewife. "Your choices will surely lead to your happiness." Father was right. I devotedly supported my husband's entrepreneurial venture, and Next Tech Solutions experienced rapid growth. We purchased a $15 million mansion in an upscale Palo Alto neighborhood, hired private staff, and traveled abroad on private jets. However, what I truly cherished were these peaceful moments with my husband and son. Since our marriage, our life had become enviably prosperous. Eric attended Palo Alto Private High School and won a gold medal in the Mathematics Olympiad. My son, who inherited his grandfather's sharp business acumen along with a kind and thoughtful personality, was my pride and joy. Lately, though, something had been bothering me. My husband's attitude had clearly changed. His former humility had vanished, replaced by an arrogant demeanor born of success. Long-serving board members had expressed concern about his increasingly overbearing behavior at board meetings. And 6 months ago, my sister Jessica joined Nextech's marketing department and began frequently visiting our home. Despite company regulations prohibiting office romances, my ambitious sister would openly date young employees while eyeing my lifestyle enviously. Eric seemed to sense his father's changes too. "Dad used to be different," he would sometimes murmur. Even among the household staff, rumors were circulating that something was amiss. In particular, one maid had anxiously confided in me about my husband staying late at the office alone with my sister. But these weekend afternoons, playing chess with my son in our mansion's living room, were still our precious time together. As the fireplace crackled softly and the aroma of tea brought by the maid melted into the tranquil atmosphere, early blooming plum blossoms had begun to flower in our vast garden. "Mom, don't you think Dad's been acting strange lately?" As I searched for an answer to Eric's sudden question, I had to admit my husband had changed. But I still believed I had the power to protect our home. Just as I was thinking this, the sound of the front door being flung open echoed through the house. The unfamiliar click of high heels and sweet perfume drew closer. There stood my husband and sister, hand in hand. My husband in his expensive suit and my sister clutching a designer bag, both wearing smug expressions. "Catherine, we need to talk." My husband's cold voice pierced the warmth of our fireplace-lit space. The atmosphere in our antique-furnished living room seemed to freeze instantly. "I want a divorce. I'm starting a new life with her." I quietly observed my husband. His expensive suit collar was slightly askew, uncharacteristic of his usually impeccable appearance. His Italian leather shoes seemed to have lost their usual luster. His tie pin was crooked, as if he had dressed hastily. And on his profile wafted an unfamiliar perfume. Beside him, my sister Jessica wore a triumphant expression. I could see her hands trembling slightly as they clutched her $100,000 Hermes bag. Unlike her usual confident demeanor, she seemed somehow unsettled. Her head-to-toe luxury brand attire looked out of place in this setting. "Pack your things and leave immediately." Following my husband's cold command, my sister chimed in. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to be the CEO's wife now." Her voice was unnaturally high-pitched, like a child's. Jessica's eyes appraised my $30,000 cashmere sweater. Since joining the company 6 months ago, she had always looked enviously at my possessions and lifestyle. She probably thought she had finally obtained it all. Her expression revealed the twisted jealousy she had harbored since childhood. The trees in our vast garden swayed in the winter wind. Through the glass of the pool house at the far end of the garden, I could see the maids anxiously watching the scene unfold. The warm light from the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the antique furniture. In that moment, time seemed to stand still in an eerie silence. "Come on, hurry up and pack your things." My husband raised his voice again, with a hint of impatience in his tone. My sister gave a small nod, her gestures betraying her desire to quickly take possession of my mansion lifestyle. By the chessboard, Eric quietly stood up. He was still clutching the white queen in his hand. His eyes, as they gazed at his father, were the very picture of composure. The logical thinking he had honed in the mathematics Olympiad seemed to shine in his eyes. "Dad, that's impossible." Eric's voice carried an inner strength despite its calmness. His words held a certainty that seemed beyond his 15 years. "What do you mean, impossible?" My husband's voice grew harsh. "Because Mom owns 51% of the company's shares." At Eric's words, the room fell silent. Even the fireplace flames seemed to freeze. Only the ticking of the ancient clock marked the heavy silence. The color drained from my husband's face. His perfectly maintained expression crumbled visibly. His hand, wearing a $7 million Rolex, began to shake violently. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead as his brand-name suit became disheveled. My sister let out a cry like a scream and dropped her Hermes bag. The expensive decorations rolled across the marble floor, the sound jarring in the heavy atmosphere. The scattered accessories seemed symbolic of her feudal ambitions. "That's impossible." My husband's voice trembled. The dignity of Next-Tech Solutions founder, the darling of Silicon Valley, crumbled in an instant. "What do you mean?" "Our plan was..." My sister's perfect makeup began to smear. Her expression, carefully crafted at an expensive spa, dissolved in tears. Black mascara streaked down her cheeks, staining her expensive blouse. I rose slowly. "Yes, that's correct." My voice was surprisingly calm. Father had meticulously planned for this moment. I felt his deep love, determined to protect my and my son's future until the very end. "For years ago, while you were preoccupied with IPO preparations, Father was quietly accumulating shares through a trust bank. And just before he passed away 2 years ago, he transferred all the shares to me." My husband's knees shook, and he collapsed onto the Italian luxury sofa. My sister fell to pieces, desperately trying to gather the scattered decorations from her designer bag. The scene was like watching a castle in the sand crumble away. "Until now, I believed in and supported your success and our family's happiness. But that's no longer necessary." The fireplace crackled quietly. The plum blossoms in the garden bloomed proudly in the winter sunlight. In their pure appearance, I saw a reflection of my own resolve. Mother. Eric squeezed my hand. That warmth gave me certainty in the hope of the new life about to begin. Catherine, wait. My husband, rising from the sofa, desperately called out to me. His voice had completely lost its former authority. This must be some mistake. I'm the founder and principal shareholder. The shares in First National Trust's name must belong to institutional investors? My husband pulled out his phone with trembling hands and began calling his lawyer. His fingers slipped on the screen, repeatedly misdialing the same number. Check the shareholder registry. Right now. Through the phone, I could sense the lawyer frantically responding. My sister knelt on the floor, sobbing and pleading with me. Please. I really. Her words trailed off, wet with tears. Jessica, you're still young. I looked down at my sister quietly. But this will be your first major mistake as a working adult. Eric brought an old document from the study. It was a stock transfer certificate in our grandfather's handwriting. I found this in grandfather's study. When I showed it to Mom, she confirmed it was real. My son continued his explanation calmly. 4 years ago, when Nextech began preparing for its IPO, grandfather recognized the company's potential. But he was also concerned about Dad's behavior. So. Wait. My husband shouted. Receiving a call from his lawyer, his expression turned pale. 5.1 million shares in First National Trust's name. This. Catherine's father. He wiped the sweat from his brow with trembling hands. His expensive suit collar was completely disheveled, his tie loosened. All transferred to Catherine in the inheritance 2 years ago. I nodded slowly. Before he died, Father said this to me: I trust your judgment. Use these shares when the time comes. The atmosphere in the living room grew heavier. The fireplace flames cast our shadows large against the wall. My holdings are 3 million shares. I sold some to start living luxuriously, but not enough to maintain control. My husband muttered. Nextech's sales had continued their rapid growth, with the stock price reaching 10 times its IPO level. However, that success had dulled my husband's judgment and bred arrogance. The remaining 1.9 million shares are held by institutional investors and public shareholders. Eric added. His mind, trained in the mathematics Olympiad, had completed the calculations instantly. Dad didn't even understand the shareholder structure. He assumed it was just another institutional investor because it was in First National Trust's name. My son's cool analysis left my husband without a rebuttal. He had underestimated the trust bank's shares, convinced that his position as founder made his control unshakable. But why did you keep quiet all this time? My sister asked between sobs. I was just observing. I answered calmly. I believed in my husband's growth, in the company's development. But, you changed. You began to take family, our bonds, lightly. My husband sat down heavily. His former dignity and arrogance had completely vanished. After the IPO, you sold 4 million shares. With those profits, you acquired this mansion, luxury cars, and an extravagant lifestyle. But you lost your passion for the company. The grandeur of our antique-furnished living room now felt hollow. You began to disregard corporate governance, becoming increasingly tyrannical at board meetings. And finally, I glanced at my sister. She hung her head, shoulders shaking with sobs. You even seduced my sister, ignoring the company's rules against office romance. No. Jessica desperately raised her voice. I made the first move. I was envious of my sister's life. I thought if I became the CEO's wife. I sighed deeply at her words. My sister, from a wealthy family, had always envied my life with my husband. Ambition and jealousy had warped her judgment. The board is prepared, I announced quietly. I've already concluded discussions with the lawyers, auditing firm, and major institutional investors. My husband's expression grew even paler. My sister let out a hysterical cry. A new management structure begins tomorrow. Eric stood beside me, squeezing my hand. My son's steady presence strengthened my resolve further. Robert, I've prepared an appropriate severance package. Jessica, you're terminated effective today. Direct any compensation claims through our lawyers. The fireplace crackled. The plum blossoms in the garden bloomed proudly in the winter sunlight. Goodbye, my voice echoed quietly. Later, a heavy atmosphere hung over the boardroom on the 30th floor of Nextech Solutions headquarters. The windows offered a panoramic view of Palo Alto. The conference table was set with premium mineral water and coffee, with tablets placed before each attendee. The extraordinary board meeting will now commence. The secretary's voice rang out in the tense atmosphere. My husband Robert sat in the CEO's chair, but his appearance had completely lost yesterday's dignity. His expensive suit was wrinkled, with dark circles under his eyes. He must have spent the night strategizing. The executive's gazes turned to me. Next to me, dressed in a simple but elegant Chanel suit, sat Jonathan Smith from a major law firm. First, I proposed the dismissal of Robert Williams as CEO. My voice resonated calmly through the conference room. Yesterday's investigation confirmed the following misconduct. Detailed documentation appeared on the screen. Private use of luxury cars purchased with company expenses. Inappropriate personal use of corporate jets. Questionable transactions with affiliated companies. And I paused briefly. Personnel decisions violating company policy and power harassment. A murmur arose among the executives. Several frowned as they looked at the documents. This is all a misunderstanding. My husband raised his voice. I'm the founder. We'll move to a vote. The lawyer calmly interrupted. Catherine Williams, holding 5.1 million shares under First National Trust, representing 51% voting rights, votes in favor of dismissal. Other board members, please cast your votes. Hands rose one after another. The seasoned directors seemed to have already grasped the situation. They too had been concerned about my husband's recent tyrannical management. By majority vote, we confirmed the dismissal of Robert Williams as CEO. The lawyer's voice filled the room with finality. My husband slumped deeply into his chair, covering his face with both hands. Moving on to the second proposal. I spoke again. I proposed the following new management structure. A new organization chart appeared on screen. James Anderson, with extensive Silicon Valley management experience, will serve as interim CEO. I, Catherine Williams, will assume the position of board chair. Mr. Anderson was a highly respected executive in the tech industry. He had already given his informal consent last night. Additionally, we will establish a special investigation committee to strengthen compliance and increase the number of outside directors to enhance governance transparency. The subsequent vote passed unanimously. Relief showed on the executives' faces. We will now begin the first board meeting under the new structure. As the secretary began distributing new materials, the boardroom door burst open. "Wait, please." My sister Jessica rushed in. Her makeup was gone, her eyes swollen from crying. "I have something to say. Ms. Jessica Hamilton, you are no longer an employee," the lawyer stated quietly. "Your resignation was accepted last night." "But, sister." I gazed quietly at my sister. "Jessica, your severance pay and compensation will be communicated through our lawyers. There's a psychology counselor position open in Sydney, Australia. I've prepared a letter of recommendation." My sister's eyes widened. "Why?" "I want you to take some distance and reconsider your life." My voice was stern yet warm. "Someday, rise up through your own abilities." My sister choked up, bowed deeply, and turned to leave. My husband remained collapsed in his chair. "Mr. Robert Williams." The lawyer addressed him. "Please review these retirement documents. You'll receive $5 million in severance, with a 2-year non-compete clause restricting work in similar industries." My husband slowly raised his face and began reviewing the documents with trembling hands. "Regarding the shares, we'll purchase all 3 million shares at 90% of market value," I announced. "The price takes your position into consideration." My husband nodded silently and began signing the documents. His former arrogant demeanor had completely vanished. "This concludes all agenda items." As the secretary's voice echoed, the new CEO Mr. Anderson stood up. "First, I'll send a message to all employees. As the first statement under the new structure, I promise the following." A new vision appeared on screen. Transparent management, improved employee benefits, and implementation of sustainable growth strategies. The directors offered light applause. Outside the window, the California morning sun shone brightly. The start of a new day. I quietly stood and left the boardroom. Eric was waiting in the headquarters lobby. "Mom, are you okay?" I smiled at my son's concerned voice. "Yes, everything went well." "That's good." "Now." Eric's words were cut off by footsteps behind us. Turning around, my husband stood there. "Catherine, just one last thing." His voice had regained its former gentleness. "I'm sorry. Thanks to you, I remembered what's truly important." I nodded silently. Taking Eric's hand, I strode out of the building with confidence. 1 year has passed since that day. After a temporary decline following the transition to new management, Next Tech Solutions stock price has continued to set new records, with transparent management and proactive reforms earning high praise. The market capitalization has exceeded $5 billion, making it one of Silicon Valley's leading companies. As board chair, I guide the company with gentle yet firm resolve. Harvard Business Review praised my management style as bringing fresh air to Silicon Valley. I was also selected as one of Forbes' 50 most influential women in business. Catherine, how are the preparations for your next lecture coming along? My secretary Jane brought materials to my new office. This elegant office, located in a quiet Palo Alto residential area, is my new base of operations. Yes, I've almost finished the manuscript for the Stanford Business School's special lecture. On my desk lay lecture materials titled, "The New Era of Women Executives." Mom, I think this section would be better with more specific examples. Eric, reviewing the materials, offered his input. Now a high school sophomore, my son often visits my office after school to exchange views on management. I see, you're absolutely right. I smiled, and Eric returned a happy grin. He's excelling in his studies too, having recently won the national mathematics competition. Stanford University has already offered him early admission. Oh, Mom, I checked today's board meeting minutes. My son handed me a document. Since last year, Eric has been helping with board operations as a weekend intern. The executives highly value his sincere attitude. Thank you. As I reviewed the document, I smiled secretly. I could sense the qualities of a next-generation leader steadily developing in my son. Outside the window, camellias cultivated by the gardener were in full bloom. Though this new residence I purchased isn't as large as our previous mansion, it's filled with warmth. Madam, you have a visitor. The maid quietly announced. My sister Jessica had come from Sydney. Her expression was unrecognizably serene compared to a year ago. Working as a counselor in Australia, she seemed to be gradually finding her own path. I came today to properly thank you. Jessica's eyes held a sincere light. Thank you for pushing me away then. In my new life in Sydney, I've finally learned the joy of achieving something through my own efforts. I felt truly relieved at my sister's transformation. Keep up the good work. She nodded deeply at my words. I heard Robert, my ex-husband, is living in a small Midwestern town. Rumors say he was hired as a management consultant for a local small business and leads a modest life. Though he doesn't contact me directly, he regularly inquires about our son's well-being through lawyers. Mom, it's almost time for the Singapore branch meeting. Eric's voice brought me back to the present. My tablet displayed a notification for an upcoming video conference with our overseas offices. Nextech's new AI project is fascinating. My son commented, absorbed in the materials on screen. If things continue smoothly, we should be ready for global expansion next year. Under CEO Anderson's leadership, the company continues steady growth. Employee satisfaction has reached an all-time high, attracting talented individuals one after another. But Mom, you're the most amazing. Eric continued with a serious expression. You protected management rights while blazing a new path. Yet you never become arrogant and never forget to be grateful to those around you. I felt deep affection at my son's words. It's thanks to you, Eric. Because you held my hand that day, I've been able to come this far. The soft evening light streamed into the office. The garden trees swayed in the wind, announcing the arrival of a new season. The shares my father entrusted to me carried more than just property rights, they conveyed an important message. financial independence, family bonds, and above all, the courage to forge your own path in life. "Mom, shall we head home?" Eric called out. Walking shoulder to shoulder with my son, I felt enveloped in quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Outside the window, the camellias gleamed in the setting sun. In their dignified appearance, I saw a reflection of my own resolve. From here on, I would continue to live strongly, gracefully, and proudly. After all, this was just a new beginning.